most financial services companies are being pushed by their customers and by the industry to innovate at a very quick pace. And because of that, they've essentially all become technology companies, since most of the innovation we're seeing today is happening in API form. In other words, the development of APIs has allowed BFSI companies to move quickly to meet the demands of the market and of their customers. What that does, however, is it creates a little bit more of a complex picture than we typically were used to with the monolithic applications of the past. APIs, on the one hand, allow for far greater innovation. They allow companies to move much quicker, but they also increase the attack landscape. They increase the possibility and the number of ways in which a company can be attacked, and they also open up the potential for exposure of sensitive data, exposure of backend systems. They open up the possibility for attackers to use automated techniques to enumerate different types of vulnerabilities or ways of compromising businesses. And on top of that, because developers are under so much pressure to innovate and push out new technology at a quick pace, they often do so by standing up infrastructure that may not go through standard processes, including the security checks and balances that the security team may have put in place. And that often stands up what you might call shadow or rogue endpoints and rogue infrastructure that they aren't inventoried, they aren't managed, and they certainly aren't secured. And that opens up the business to additional vulnerability as well. And that is a key challenge that we see globally, in fact, but particularly in the BFSI sector, is that visibility into APIs is really the first step into securing them. If we can't see the traffic to and from APIs and we don't know what infrastructure and what APIs are out there, it's going to be extremely difficult for us to protect those APIs from abuse, misuse, and attack. What's interesting about the topic of API discovery is the world is kind of divided into two camps. One camp, which I think is a smaller percentage of businesses, that camp is basically filled with people who say, well, if I discover my APIs, if I know where they are, then that creates security headaches and liabilities for me, and then I need to deal with that. So I'd rather just not know. Now, of course, I don't think this is a good approach personally. I don't think that sort of being like an ostrich and sticking your head in the sand and pretending that the world around you doesn't exist is a good approach. I prefer the other camp, which is in fact the majority of customers that I meet with, which is that they realize that there's likely APIs out there that are shadow APIs or rogue APIs that have been stood up for a variety of reasons. And there's really only one proven way to identify them or to discover them if they aren't already known, inventoried, and managed. And that is to study the traffic going across the variety of environments, whether they're on-premise, cloud, multiple cloud, doesn't matter. The traffic going to and from each application and API across all of the environments, no matter how complex the infrastructure, needs to be studied and analyzed to discover where there are APIs that are not inventoried, managed, and secured already. As far as an API security strategy, first of all, it needs to be tailored to and fit within the existing security strategy for the business. So obviously, most businesses these days of a substantial size are going to have a risk register. They're going to have a sophisticated risk management program. They're going to have compliance and regulatory strategies. They might have security operations and a number of other things. And API security needs to be a part of that overall risk strategy. Beyond that, and I guess diving deeper into that, each API has its own risk profile. It exposes a certain amount of data that may or may not be more or less sensitive. It may have certain authentication and authorization or identity management requirements, whereas others may be completely open for public information, for example, et cetera, and so on. And so for each API, we need to understand what is the risk of that particular API introduces into the enterprise. That needs to be part of our overall risk strategy. And of course, we discussed just a moment ago the need to really discover and inventory, manage, and secure all of your APIs. Once that's done, that risk profile needs to be filled out, like we just mentioned. And then beyond that, we need to constantly be on the lookout for abuse of the APIs, attacks against the APIs, fraud that may be going against the APIs, and that requires visibility and telemetry across the environment. Many organizations today have complex hybrid and multi-cloud environments. That visibility needs to be turned into continuous security monitoring, needs to be turned into regulatory and compliance measures, and of course, it needs to be acted upon if there is an instance of abuse, misuse, or an attack or fraud. That needs to be detected and then mitigated in a timely manner. And of course, lessons learned need to be taken from all of that and incorporated back into the process to improve all points along the process as part of the overall security strategy, including preventive controls. We talked about detective controls in terms of detecting and mitigating an incident, regardless of what type of incident, but preventive controls are what help us prevent intrusions in the first place, and those are also extremely important. And an important part that some people overlook with the preventive controls is the fact that no matter how complex the environment, we need to be able to define and deploy and then subsequently enforce those detective controls, those preventive controls in a simple and straightforward manner. And if that defining, deployment, and enforcement of those preventive controls is too complicated, that introduces a vulnerability in the potential for human error or for oversight that can be detrimental to API security. So again, to summarize, overall, API security as part of an overall risk management strategy, preventive controls to make sure that we can define, deploy, and enforce preventive controls across the infrastructure, no matter how complex it is. And then, of course, telemetry required to allow us to detect abuse, misuse, attacks, and fraud against our APIs, and subsequently mitigate that. And of course, lessons learned from all of those that we feed back into the process. So I think AI has two main roles. And I know today AI is a bit of a buzzword. People go around talking about it a lot, but let's be very specific. I find that when AI is applied in strategic and targeted ways towards specific problems, it can be an effective tool. So one way AI is extremely effective is in increasing the efficacy or improving the efficacy of tools, security tools, including those around API security. AI can be used in a number of specific use cases to identify certain types of issues or certain types of attacks that may be going on against our APIs or against a business's APIs. So that is one very good use for API. It's one that, when applied properly and targeted to specific issues in a strategic manner, can be very effective. The other one is to take the tremendous amount of noise in the form of log data and eventing and telemetry that's out there, billions and billions of records for most large businesses, especially in the BFSI space. AI can be used to go through that data and identify events of interest that should be brought to the attention of a human analyst, right? There's really no way that a human security analyst can go through billions of log events in a given day. They obviously need some way to reduce that data to a more actionable, reliable set of data. And AI, there are a number of techniques that can be used to do that. But AI is fast becoming one of those techniques where AI can be run over the vast quantities of data that are out there and can, if applied well, if tuned well, can pull out events of interest that a human security analyst can then go analyze and investigate and take further. So API security is already an important topic, but when we start to get into the idea of compliance with regulation, things get a little bit more interesting, shall we say. When there's a regulation, there are often fines that come if a business does not comply with that regulation. And those fines in some cases can be quite large. And so no business obviously wants to find itself in a situation where they face a very large fine for being non-compliant with a given regulatory framework, like some of the ones you mentioned. And so this kind of heightens the awareness or heightens the urgency around needing to apply security to our API environments. And in particular, a lot of the regulations deal with exposure of sensitive data, whether it's private data or whether it's some type of protected data or confidential or sensitive data. And the ability to detect that data specifically, regardless of the regulation, data that's considered protected or sensitive or private under that particular regulation, that adds another dimension to API security that we can't ignore. We have to be able to efficiently and effectively detect sensitive and confidential data that's been exposed, that then introduces risk from a compliance perspective that we need to mitigate immediately and remediate. The most successful security programs that I've seen globally are the ones that understand that the business should be a partner, that the security team should not be the party of no or the team of no, and that security is most effective when you work collaboratively and invest in building relationships with other aspects of the business. Ultimately, security has matured as a field. We now have a seat at the table, you could say, with other parts of the business that have been at the table, so to speak, for a long time. And we have to rise to the occasion and interact with our peers in other areas of the business in a way where we're a partner to them. We help them accomplish their goals while they help us securely help them accomplish their goals. Or another way to say that, perhaps a better way to say that, is we need to help them as they help us. We have certain goals and priorities for security, but they also have certain goals and priorities for their particular areas of the business. And if we block them or impede them from achieving those, there will quickly be quite a bit of friction and separation between security and the other areas of the business. And so one of the most important parts, and this is sometimes overlooked, whether it's API security or security in general, one of the most important parts of a CISO's job and the CISO's entire team is building those relationships to foster basically collaborative working relationships between security and the other parts of the business. That in turn will have the business trusting the security team more. They will work more collaboratively with the security team, and that, of course, will help the security team help the business run and operate more securely.